So this is Andrew Hood and Helen Miller. You can probably guess which one's which. And they're both going to start by just talking a little bit about what they did before they got to IFS, what they've done while at IFS, and then we'll open up to questions that people have about what they can ask about what life is really like here. So I don't know who wants to go first. Or you
Okay, great. So I joined IFS in 2007, I think. I had previously done an undergraduate degree in economics at UCL. I then joined, and after joining did an MSc at UCL part-time. That's quite common for people who come with an undergraduate to go and do a master's part-time at UCL. That's kind of hard work, but it's really good because it means you get to carry on studying while you're here. There's obviously some nice synergies between sort of the economics you're learning here and the new economics you're learning at UCL. It's probably worth saying that some people, not everyone comes with an undergraduate, some people come with an MSc and a few people come with a PhD. And there's an opportunity when you're here, once you've got an MSc, to do a PhD part-time. And quite a few of the people who are here do that. So I came, I did my MSc. I worked in what was then called the Productivity and Innovation team. So many people, when they join, you work with a senior researcher quite closely on projects that they've kind of got in the pipeline. So I did a range of things, including thinking about when firms become big multinationals, what does that mean for the home country? How do they organise themselves? How do they organise their research? Quite a lot on corporate tax, how firms avoid corporate tax, how the government designs a corporate tax, what the implications of those things are. And then over time, and this is common again across IFS, you get more say over your own research agenda, and you design, you kind of come up with your own ideas and drive more of your own research. So recently I'm also still doing lots of corporate tax stuff. I've also been working on thinking about what happened to investment after the big recession, why firms stopped making these big investments, what does that mean for the UK economy, why UK productivity has been so low, and what we might want to do about that. Related to that, I went on a secondment to the Bank of England for a little while and worked with those guys on the productivity puzzle and what's going on there, and I've got an ongoing collaboration with them. So that's currently what I do at IFS.
Cool. I'm Andy. I joined the IFS in 2012 after doing undergrads at Oxford. I did philosophy, politics and economics. And like Helen, I've since done the part-time MSc at UCL, finished that actually just this summer. So I started in a team called Direct Tax and Welfare. So I was working on mainly looking at the government's tax and benefit changes. So that involved some pretty kind of policy end kind of work. So things like I'm part of the team where overnight after the July budget or the autumn statement back in November, we work overnight to try and pull that analysis together and then present to the press and other interested people the next day. But I've also had the chance to work on a number of more academic orientated projects. So I did some work looking at the impact of housing benefit changes on rents. And more recently, I've been able to, as Helen said, start to kind of shape my own research agenda. And in particular, I'm interested in intergenerational transfers, so inheritances and gifts from parents to children, and the impacts that they have on inequality, both in wealth and in consumption. So that's something that I'm trying to work on more over the next few years.
Okay, so I'll start with a question then. Perhaps you could both say what a typical week might look like. You've kind of talked about what research areas you do, but not talked about kind of how you do research. What will you be doing next week, for example?
Okay, so the work at IFS is kind of varied. It's one of the good things about IFS is that we're all involved in lots of different things. So there'll be lots of policy work and lots of academic work. So a typical week's a bit tough because it depends what you're doing. But so next week, for example, I'll be doing a combination of things. So we're currently getting ready for the annual Green Budget. So a lot of us are working on writing chapters that are sort of policy focused, aimed at a kind of broad, not necessarily particularly specialist audience, trying to explain things about the tax system or upcoming policy changes that you might need to know in order to be well informed when the budget comes up. So I'll be spending some time writing about corporate tax policies and what you might need to know for that. We are also doing this research on investment, so I'll be spending some of my time bogged down in data, trying to write new algorithms to estimate some econometric models that we're working on. So a lot of it will be a bit technical and a bit headbangy. And then probably near the end of the week, I'll be thinking about a presentation that I've got to do the following week, a big policy presentation, so I'll start getting together some slides to write for that. So in general, weeks tend to be a mixture of either some technical data or econometric work. It could be to do with writing reports, writing academic papers, giving policy presentations, talking to policymakers, writing research grants, and a whole range of other things. What's your week look like, Andy?
So I guess next week is some similar sense, kind of similar in some sense, kind of a bit of a mix. So we're working on a project where we're basically trying to project the income distribution, so what's going to happen to household incomes through to the end of the decade and what that means for living standards, poverty and inequality. So we've done the kind of bulk of the data work. I've spent the last few days writing a first draft, so we'll be kind of putting the finishing touches to that, making any changes that more senior people deem necessary.
You mean improvements?
Improvements, yeah.
Changes.
Improvements. And putting together some slides, because a week on Tuesday we then have an advisory group meeting where external people who we've agreed with the people funding the project will come and will present, and they'll give us comments, and we'll take those into account and improve the work before we publish it. And then I'm also going to be doing some pretty data intensive work trying to estimate the relationship between, hopefully trying to think about estimating the relationship between lifetime earnings and how much inheritance you receive. So is it true that people who have higher lifetime earnings on average inherit more from their parents? And then, because that's an important input into the model of consumption over the life cycle that I'm trying to build at the minute.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll open up to questions now. Don't be shy.
Would it be possible to sort of spend the day with someone with the in the IFS, just sort of seeing what you do at slightly closer quarters and sort of writing about that and just sort of finding out more about what you do? Not if you're not I'm a social scientist more than an economist. I'd love to see more about what you do, but I'm not an economist, so I know a form of life.
I didn't even think that.
You might find you're talking a different language to many people. I think we'd have to. It might be possible to arrange something for a period. I don't know about a whole day. I mean, as these two have said, I mean, a lot of the time people sit at their computer deep in data, so it can be very, very exciting for the individual, but not necessarily exciting to spectate.
Yeah.
We've just had, in fact, a journalist come in and spend a bit of time in the IFS to find out what it's like here. He's going to write a lengthy piece for The Guardian in the next few weeks, but that was certainly one of the challenges for us, or for him, would be that it's quite hard to work out what people are really doing when they're just talking econometrics to somebody, or just talking to the econometrics to their computer.
In fact, related to that, so one of the things that the guide from The Guardian came in over the period of the autumn statement, so on the night where the government says lots of things and we madly work overnight to do lots of analysis. And one of the things he commented on was that he couldn't believe how calm we all were. So he expected it to be like a newsroom where we were all shouting at each other and running around like headless chickens. And actually, what you'd have seen is that we're all sitting very quietly at our computers, looking at data or reading things or just working out things. And there's some collaboration going on, but it's certainly not screaming at each other. So if you looked at an average day, you'd see people just sitting in their own little worlds, doing things. Then there are meetings, and then we do things. But a lot of it is that we're just sitting down, working hard and doing our own thing.
Just to come back, I mean, the sort of big data is relatively new. I mean, it's that sort of kind of getting your head around that as a social scientist. I think that's what my interest would be, to sort of see where you're getting data from. I mean, what was it, the Family Resource Survey?
Yeah.
And that was only 20,000. I mean, that's not a massive number. I mean, the population. I'm just interested in where data comes from, how you look at it. I think you've got your software called taxpayer and stuff. I mean, I'm just kind of interested in all of that sort of stuff. So maybe not a day, maybe just half a day, maybe even an hour. But I just
No, that could be possible. I mean, on the big data point, I mean, lots of the work that goes on at IFS has been making use of different. People work in different areas here. Helen might work away on a data set of patents that companies have. Andy will work away on a data set looking at households and their incomes and where they come from. But a lot of what people do is spend a lot of time thinking about those data, what they can really measure and what they can tell us about how different people, organisations respond to the institutions they face. But we have household surveys here that go back to the mid-1960s that are of decent sample size and decent scientific quality. The kind of big data change I don't think is so much of a revolution here. I think the one thing that we are getting a bit more of is, at least when lawyers aren't too heavily involved, is access to administrative data. where, so for example, Andy said we've been looking at the extent to which cuts to housing benefit had led to reductions in rents. The way we're doing that is because the Department for Work and Pensions gave us access to all of the housing benefit records, which basically means there is one observation every single month for every single person in Great Britain who's receiving housing benefit over a period covering 4 years or so. So that gives us, that's perhaps the big change, which is partly is really about administrative data from government, and it's partly driven by processing power. I mean, I started at IFS quite a long while ago, but that data set given to me then would have been completely useless because I wouldn't be able to use it. It's still pretty challenging for the computing power we have here, because I think the first thing Andy did was drop half the data.
You kept a third because you literally couldn't run it on the computer because it was bigger than the RAM.
I don't know, that data's always, it seems, been a part of IFS, and it's always been true that people have been using data. It's like, it's getting bigger, and our computer's getting bigger, and now needs a room of its own, but it's and its own cooling system. But it's just a continuation rather than a revolution. Yep.
You were saying a minute ago that you were sort of writing new algorithms to come up with certain econometric estimates and stuff.
Yeah.
How much of what you do needs specialist knowledge about coding or particular econometric programs and so on? And is that something that's easy to come into straight out of a bachelor's degree?
Yeah, good question. So it's going to vary a lot across people. So there are some people here who do almost all policy work and relatively little of that. There are some people who have very, very advanced econometric knowledge and are really right at the forefront of their fields. I'm probably somewhere in the middle of that. So nobody who comes as an undergraduate is expected to come in and be able to do fancy programming. We expect people to come in having maybe never used data before. And actually one of the good things about IFS is that you get to work with a more senior person who'll, teach you data and get you up to speed with those things. And then some people will go on to learn more technical skills, usually in collaboration with the person they're working with, and usually alongside doing an MSc or a PhD, or maybe alongside some specialist courses. So that's what I did. I came in having never opened data before. I got some, one-on-one training with the people I was working with, and now over time I've learned a lot of those skills. So now I work in a particular area. And another good thing about IFS is that I'm always learning. So a year ago, I couldn't do what I'm doing now, and I can. And in hopefully a year's time, I'll be able to do even better. So you're continually learning and continually learning new skills. And we have access to lots of specialists and lots of academics who we can go and speak to get some of those skills. So no, it's not expected that you have to come in with any fancy programming skills. If you did, it'd be useful, but it's not. Most people don't. Most people come in having not run a regression yet. So.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is similarly, I came in having never opened data and never done any programming, and I think in some sense it's probably been the biggest positive surprise about life at IFS is that I thought that basically I would be able to tolerate that on the basis that the other bits of the job would be fun, and actually I've found myself really enjoying at times coding and writing that stuff, but because it's just satisfying when you get a computer to do what you're trying to tell it to do. Yeah. But also because actually you feel like that is a part of your life. I couldn't have done this 6 months, a year ago, and that's quite a nice feeling. And
you improve very, very quickly. We have some students who come in
in
a second year who literally haven't seen a data set, haven't seen data, but at the end of 6 weeks they're running regressions and doing data. So you get up to speed with these things, partly because you're in training is very, very intense. You sit with a senior person and they show you how to do it, and they, it's like your own very specialised help desk. So it's, I think it's small enough that we can do that because everyone's got a senior person on their side. So it's a quick learning curve.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of our recruitment, I think roughly speaking, about half of people who start here come straight from an undergraduate degree. About half come with a master's degree. A small number come straight. I know that adds up to more than 100%, but a small number come with a PhD. And pretty much all of those who come with an undergraduate degree choose to go and do a master's degree part-time subsequently. And I think it would be quite hard not to do that. I mean, you're coming to IFS, you're making the choice that you want to be an economist and you want to do some technical stuff. I think it'll be kind of hard, but not all of those who come with a master's degree could go and do a PhD. It's probably again about 50-50 or something. But so I think the answer is partly, you can, and lots of people who come to IFS, all three of us in fact, come straight from an undergraduate degree, but it would be a surprise if someone joined us with an undergraduate degree and didn't do a master's. It's also not unusual for people to come with higher levels of education already.
It's also attracted to the master's because IFS helps pay the fees, so it's another reason to do a master's.
I was wondering when you began in IFS, did you join a team because you knew that was what you're interested in, or is that something that, you know, oh, we have this project right now and we need someone, so we apply and you get that, and you develop the interest for that particular area?
So basically the way it works is that, so IFS is relatively small, we have teams, and actually going through this now of working out who might need a new person, because we have projects in mind, we have funding, we need a new person. So the very short answer is no. What tends to happen is that we have a demand for a type of person, we find the best economist we can find and we fill that position. We do obviously ask people if they have preferences, and if they have very, very strong preferences, that will be taken into account of. But obviously it's not the case that every year we have a position in every team, because that's not true. So it's a certain amount of demand from our part led. I would say, however, having sat through interviews and met all the new people who come through, is that people often come thinking they're really interested in education, and they get here and find actually they didn't really know very much about education or tax policy or what it looked like on the ground. And had you have asked me, I'd never have joined the project innovation team. I now wouldn't change it. So I think you come at an undergraduate having done lots of economics and not really seen in detail what it looks like. So it's actually very hard to know really, unless you've got a very, very clear, like you really want to be a development economist or something, very clear. My experience is that most people don't come in with such strong preferences. Also within IFS, there's cross-team working, so people do work across the institutions. If it turns out that you get here and actually you really love doing something a bit different, often you can move your agenda towards something that is more aligned with what you're interested in. If you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's right. I mean, we will probably be recruiting something like 3 people in this year's round, and we have specific roles in mind. We'll find the 3 best people we can and fit them the best we can to those 3 positions. But I think I'd also stress that day to day what these people will be doing will be the same. It will just have different labels. So they'll be learning about the institutions in the area that they work in. They'll be learning about the literature that's relevant to that area, and they'll be playing with a lot of data. And it may be called company responses to corporation tax, or it might be how rents change when housing benefit rates change, or how schools' recruitment decisions change when the funding formula are changed. But it's all about an economic literature, some institutions and some data, and so we're all doing very similar things, even though they sound very different.
Yeah. And of course, once you're in, we all go to the same seminar, so I know lots about inheritance tax policy, not because I work in the area, but because I've heard Andy's talks and I've heard other people's talks, and you get to know lots about the broad economics areas, because we have seminars twice a week and you go to conferences and you're exposed to broader economics in lots and lots of ways.
So there's a question at the back, I think. Yeah.
What's the application process like?
So the application process is, I think, very easy compared to, I know when I was applying quite a long time ago now, I really found that there were lots of processes, tedious, of tell us the time when you did this. So IFS is an application form, you can find it online. You write to us telling us what you've done, what your grades are like, why you'd like to work at IFS, and then we have a huge number of applications. We have about 350 applications, I think, last year. We invite a small number of those, it's about 12 to 16, to an interview, and then the interview is pure economics. So we have 2 panels of economists, and we ask you economics questions and want to see how you think and if you think like an economist. So unlike lots of processes you go through that are kind of, are you a good leader? Do you do team sports? There's none of that. It's just really, are you a good economist? Which I always really liked when we did it. So yeah, does that answer your question? Yeah.
Yeah, the deadline is the 22nd of January. Any more questions?
If you do the masters when you join, how long does it take the average person to complete that part-time?
So the way the Masters is structured is that, I think wisely, IFS say that when you arrive, you do 1 year full-time to kind of find your feet. It'd be pretty hard, I think, landing and trying to do 2 things at once. And then the Masters as a full-time program would take you 1 year. Because you're doing it part-time, you do it over 2 years. So I started at IFS in September 2012, started the Masters September 2013, and then finished it in the last summer. So it will always be a 2-year thing. That's how it works. You do half your course in the first year, half your course in the second year, and then that second summer is when you do the dissertation. At least that's the structure of the thing at the minute. Where things get more variable is how long it takes if you did want to go on to do a PhD. So there you'd have basically another 2 years of part-time courses, and that will again just take 2 years. That's just kind of fixed. But then beyond that, to getting to the point when you're writing your PhD, how long that takes really depends on a lot of things. It depends on how hard you're willing to work. It depends on how well what you're doing in your PhD fits with your IFS work. Lots of different things affect that. And so Martin finished in...
So mine was really quick. I think Martin did 3, and that was really quick. So it's probably between 3 and 12 years to finish, probably something like that is the outside edge of what does at IFS. The mean's probably like 5 or 6.
So it's a long-term commitment to do a PhD, but I think it's a lot. I'm not sure about whether I'm going to do a PhD yet. It seems to me a more fun way to do a PhD than the normal, and at least you have other people to talk to when you're doing it, rather than just being in my head on your own for 5 years.
Yeah, I think the challenge there is to make sure it's well integrated with the research that you're working on at the IFS. And clearly, the closer you can get that synergy in terms of then the quicker the more successful you'll be about getting through it. Perhaps Andy, you're closest to this. What happens when you do a master's? What happens to your time and your pay and your fees and?
If I remember this all right. So as far as I can remember, basically the way it works is that you go from being 100% time at IFS to 75% time, and your pay is reduced in line with that. On the other hand, the IFS pays 2/3 of the fees for the masters. So effectively, you pay a little bit of the fees, but that just looks like a slightly lower paycheck because they kind of go through IFS anyway. And then what that 25% time allows you to do is go to the lectures and classes and do some of the work that is required of a standard master's. So, in some sense, it doesn't add up to 100% in that you're doing 50% of a master's and 75% of a job. And so the reality is, if you got it done in 9 to 6, 5 days a week, that would be very impressive. I don't think anyone's ever managed to kind of really run that system.
You certainly won't be getting the distinction.
You certainly won't be getting this, and then so you do that for 2 years, and then in the summer, and then you get big chunks of time off for exams. So that's the other thing that's nice about the way it works is IFS tends to be relatively flexible about you basically saving up some of that time into the summer. So I didn't go to work at all in May 2014 or May 2015 because that's when I had exams. So I basically had a month off around exams, but in both cases, and then worked more than 75% time the rest of the time to kind of catch up.
I don't think it's any hard. My experience is I don't think it's any harder than doing a master's full-time either. I mean, on the one hand, you have a full-time job too, but you're doing economics here, so it's not like it's completely detached. And the people who are doing it full-time are also trying to learn econometrics, micro and macro at the same time, and you're spreading it over 2 years. So I think the challenges are different, and you're juggling different commitments. But also most people who are here have done it, and we all survived. So it's.
And I guess on the dissertation, of course, if you're thinking your project should involve getting some data together and reviewing some literature and estimating something with those data, then actually the data sit in this building. If you do it related to something you're working on in your job, you know the literature and you know what an interesting question is.
Yeah.
You just got to load up the data set that you work on most of your life here and run something slightly different with it. So there's big advantages on that.
Yeah, that's a huge advantage.
Yeah, it's much because I think trying to do a dissertation as a full-time master's student, I think is really, really hard because people land at that point, they've not really ever opened a data set. They don't really know what a sensible question is. Whereas after, effectively, you've been at IFS for nearly 3 years by the time you're doing your dissertation, and so by that point you'd have a good understanding of what's possible in an area you're interested, given the data, what hasn't been done, where's the cutting edge of the literature at the minute, where can you kind of slot a slightly smaller paper into that kind of that literature. It helps a lot.
Yeah, it's a huge benefit.
Okay, are there any more questions, or shall we?
I think it's lunch.
Yeah, it's
Okay,
lunchtime.
so in which case we will break for lunch. Thank you very much, everyone.